Hey guys, it's Marc Bruin again. A quick update. I did a video the other day on anxiety and how to work on, and I used my screen for that, to actually control or to start moderating the intensity of an anxiety attack, or to lessen the length of it, and those are both possible. There's loads of techniques to do that. It prompted an interesting question from a very good friend of mine, Michael Rhodes, a guy who I respect really highly. I'll mention his website in the YouTube video or in the YouTube link down the bottom. He said, look, that's all good and well, Mark. That was sort of his words, but he said, really, ultimately, you want to get to a point where anxiety is not necessary anymore, hey? And I said, yeah, you got a point. That's a good point. Yeah, ultimately what you want to do with clients, and that's what you would like to do, I trust as well, if you're suffering from anxiety in whatever way, shape or form, is to get to a point where that is not really an issue anymore, where the triggers that used to set off your anxiety are no longer triggers. You've dealt with it, or what seemed to bug you doesn't bug you anymore. And that's where you want to end up at. So he made a really good point, and his point ultimately to me was, and I'll talk a little bit about that today, is that thoughts determine your reality. Your thoughts determine how your body is going to respond to stuff, which ultimately, your thoughts and your bodily responses together will dictate to a very high degree what your reaction will be, which could be emotion, or more thinking, rumination as we call it, or an action, which generally is an impulse action, saying something and then immediately regretting it, or doing something and then immediately regretting it. But that's something I sort of discussed in other videos as well. So have a look at those ones. They're on my YouTube channel. The point of today is the first video that I discussed with you guys a couple of days ago is to help yourself get rid of that level of extra anxiety. So here's the anxiety response. And on top of that, once I've said that could be biological, you're scared of something, or it could be something you've learned to fear, something you are now afraid of and you don't know how you got it, but you got it. And then on top of that, that's what I talked about in the previous video, you get that level of anxiety about anxiety. Now you're actually afraid to get into a similar situation again, and then freaking out about that, which actually makes you freak out more. And that was what I was talking about, how to start limiting and lessening the intensity and length of that particular, well, maybe that anxiety about anxiety level, but also your anxiety in itself. There are ways to minimize the effects of an anxiety attack, to learn to be okay with that. Now, the point that Michael made, and that's the one that I want to emphasize today, is that really, ultimately, once you get a bit of a handle on that intensity and on the length of your panic, of the anxiety attack, or on that uneasy feeling that might be going on in your body, you want to start getting to a point where you learn to work with the trigger for that anxiety. To ideally, in the ideal world, work it back to a point where you can say, that used to be a trigger for me, and it used to set off my anxiety, but it doesn't do that anymore. So something in my life, for instance, I was public speaking as a kid, and I will not share that story as it's a bit too long for this video, but I used to nearly literally piss my pants for every show and tell and little public appearance that I had to do at school. I can still bring that emotion up if I want to. Now I'm talking in front of camera, I talk in front of crowds, I don't really care. There's still a slight bit of nervousness, and that's okay, it keeps me sharp. But I can say that what used to be a massive trigger for a massive anxiety attack in me as a kid, and even up into my mid-teens, is no longer an issue. It's not that big of an issue anymore. That's what you want to get to when it comes to anxiety and feelings of panic. Now, how do you do that? That's the big question. There's two ways really, from traditional cognitive behavioral therapy and the mindfulness informed or the mindfulness integrated cognitive behavioral therapy that I studied, but in general with normal other counseling techniques like solution focused or psychodynamic, or you mentioned acceptance and commitment therapy, whatever. There's two ways to do that. Once you can get a grip on the bodily responses with that anxiety that you're feeling, that in itself will already start to set off a cascade of new neurological connections that say, hey, your brain actually, you can see it as a cartoon. Your brain might go like, that used to freak him or her out all the time. That used to be a massive trigger. For some reason, he or she is now able to, you are now able to sit through that and actually not freak out that much. What's going on? And that not freaking out could be by you actually really tapping into your body's responses to whatever freaks you out. And to be okay with those bodily responses and not responding to them with doing stuff, more emotions, more thinking, etc. But just actually sitting with that feeling, embodying it. That in itself will start to change your neurological patterns, and there's a bit more of a story behind that too, the neurobiology of that. That ultimately will make it less and less of a trigger. And in the counseling world, we call it extinction. You extinguish a response to something that used to be a traditional response, but no longer. So that's one thing. So by becoming more what we call interoceptively aware, so the interoception, the bodily feelings that go with what you actually fear, and we all feel that, the closed throat, the pounding chest, the sweaty palms, the sweaty forehead, the clenched jaw, everything else, the churning stomach, your heart racing, whatever it is. All those things are just a signature of whatever it is that you're experiencing. It's just part of that makeup. And the more you can become okay with that makeup, the less you resist that, the less you try and push that away or try to hide from it, close your eyes and close your ears and go la 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 la. The less it actually becomes an issue. And that's something you'll have to trust me on. That's just a proven thing as well, both in the literature and in science, but also in my private practice. I see it all the time. That's one thing. So becoming okay with the bodily response, and there's loads of ways that we can do that, is one way to start lessening the effect of whatever triggers you first place. Now, the other thing that my friend Michael was talking about is say, well, what if you change your thoughts? What if you change your perceptions of stuff? And yeah, absolutely, solid point. Because that's really, in my personal belief system, but also in the way that cognitive behavioral therapy and other therapies look at things, what's really important ultimately is how you think about stuff. What is your worldview? What do you fear? What have you been taught to fear? What makes you uncomfortable? What have you experienced in your life? Maybe really traumatic, or maybe not traumatic, but impressive enough for you to build up resistance against that, or build up doubt against that, that now makes you go like, that freaks me out, or I don't like that. That always makes me really nervous, makes me feel uncomfortable. Now that's a thought pattern, a pattern of thoughts, but also a thought pattern that runs around your brain, and that actually makes your brain focus your senses to look and touch and taste and feel and smell the world for more of that stuff. Remember what I talked about when you talk about the CEO and the bodyguard or the security guard. The security guard is always on the lookout, for things that correspond with threat or that correspond with more safety. So it's either threat or more safety. So the threat stuff that you've taught yourself, that you have been taught to fear, or that life has taught you to fear, will be the stuff that your security guard will be on the lookout for. Now, when we can change the perception in your brain about that potentially scary or uneasy or uncomfortable situation, when we can help you, or when a counsellor can help you to be okay now also, or to put a different slant on that actual thing, that you seem to fear, then all of a sudden it's not that fearful anymore. And that has a massive neurobiological, neuropsychological effect as well, because then it doesn't set off that interoceptive trigger where your body starts translating all that stuff into bodily responses, and then you feel that anxiety or that panic. So in short, once we can start to learn to literally, but also figuratively, look at the world in a different way, to change our perception, to use our senses in a different way, to look, smell, touch, taste, feel, and hear for things in a different way, then our world changes. It's how people overcome fear of flying, it's how people overcome fear of heights, it's how people overcome fear of snakes, spiders, fear of whatever. Really, it doesn't matter. Fear of bridges. I had a client once who didn't dare go over bridges. It was a serious thing. But once we could teach, or once we could get her to understand that it actually wasn't that scary by learning about that, and that's often what happens, for instance, with fear of flying, learning about planes, learning about how they fly, etc., etc. You take away some of those thoughts that make it scary in the first place. So how do we do the whole thing? Okay, here's this thing you fear, you sense that, you have a bunch of thoughts on that. That elicits a bodily response in you, and that then elicits, what we call a panic attack or anxiety, and that then keeps a cycle going of anxiety where it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it keeps feeding itself. Now, there's two ways that we can interrupt all that. We can interrupt it by starting to look at the bodily response. How does that feel? Literally, how does that feel? And become okay with that being there. Your body's not going to kill you. It's going to do its thing, but it's not dangerous. It's okay. It's normal to feel that way. It's okay. Get better with that, and that will definitely change the situation. Let's also look at the thoughts that feed that bodily response, so that whatever happens on this side in terms of the practical event, what's going on, gets perceived, and I got to duck in here, so it gets perceived a different way. You start to see in a different light. Your thoughts are different. That leads to a completely different physiological response, and then leads to a different outcome here, which could still be an emotion, it could still be some overthinking, it could still be an action, a behavior, but most likely it's a more effective, more honoring, more better, reaction, or reaction for you. The ultimate idea is, and that's just counseling terminology, to go from a reaction to a response, which ultimately is an even better way of looking at things. So responding to situations rather than reacting to situations, that's the ultimate aim. Now, if you want to know how to do either the thought changes or the bodily changes, or both, because both will work towards decreasing anxiety. And if you want to look at life in a slightly bigger way, because there's obviously a bit of a spiritual source that we can put over this, in terms of what does it all mean, how does this all work out in a slightly more big picture way, well, ask me, come to me, have a session with me, do whatever. Just let's have a chat, because there's lots of stuff that I'm convinced that we can look at that can make our lives, mine, yours, anyone's, a lot better, and we don't have to live with all this stuff. So if you're interested in all that, let me know. I'm here, you know where to find me. Marc, M-A-R-C, at simplifyinglife.com.au. That's Marc, M-A-R-C, at simplifyinglife.com.au. Otherwise, find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever. And look forward to a chat. Enjoy your day. See you soon.